shift, it was very difficult for the colonial powers to put on any rent on this. So what they did was, they started a narrative, they started a view which maligned shifting cultivation. And this has continued. In fact, more recently, in 1957, there was a publication from FAO, the Food and Agriculture Organization, where they put out a global appeal to replace shifting cultivation because they considered this practice as one of the most destructive land use in the tropical areas, and hence it has to be replaced. This perception has driven policy globally. And if you look at any of the countries, whether in South Asia, Southeast Asia, Africa, or in Latin America, what you find is that governments have always tried to promote settled agriculture, replacing shifting cultivation. Now, this is problematic. And why is it problematic? There are several reasons which I'll go into later, but despite all the efforts of the governments, what you find is, even today, you have shifting cultivation which still persists in many parts of the world. Although you don't have exact estimates of what is the area under shifting cultivation, because most of these are in the uplands, and in the uplands you don't have cadastral service. So we don't know, or we don't have the measurement of how much of area is under shifting cultivation, nor do we have any estimate of how many people are involved. The recent publication about a year back by a consortium of researchers spread over Europe, Asia, and other parts have come up with estimates. And they say that in Southeast Asia alone, anything from around 14 million to 35 million people are dependent on this. And in South Asia, there are much more, many millions which are involved in this practice. If you look at the area under cultivation, there's around 280 million hectares globally which is under this practice. And of this, 110 million hectares are in Asia alone. It means that there is still a large number of people who are involved or dependent on this practice, and a large area which is under shifting cultivation, including areas in the northeast and in Arunachal. For governments, environmentalists, foresters, researchers, this practice is destructive, a cause of deforestation, soil erosion, and environmental degradation, and therefore it has to be replaced. Of late, as climate change has become an issue, there have been views that shifting cultivation is contributing to climate change and global warming. They say this because they argue that as forests are cut down and the debris burned, one, a lot of carbon dioxide is released into the atmosphere because of the burning, and the ability, global ability for sequestration is reduced because of the deforestation. Now, how much of this is correct? Is this view really true? Because you have quite a lot of researchers, on the other hand, which give you the contrary view. They say that, well, actually, if you look at the practice, shifting cultivation is not just an agricultural practice, it also promotes forests. And later, after we have heard the panelists, I would give you some facts and some, I would give you a presentation which shows that you have forests left in most of the areas where you have shifting cultivation. It's contrary to the beliefs, right? So, without any further ado, let's hear the panelists on their views on sustainable development in Arunachal and also how we manage shifting cultivation. We have Dr. Partha here, who is from Aranak. You have heard him earlier. We have Ajanta De, who you have heard earlier, Mr. Rajesh, and Professor Binoy Singh, who is from NERIST here. We have had the good fortune of working together when Professor Singh was in NEC, Northeastern Council, as the advisor, and later he was also the interim project director for one of the projects that I was working in. So we have worked together, and it's a pleasure to have you on the panel, Professor Singh. So we would start with Professor. And sorry, my apologies. And we have the young media person who we are very fortunate to have, because we want your views as well on two accounts. One, because you're from the media. Yeah. Two, you are the young media person, the youth. So the voice of the youth, we definitely want to hear your view. So we will go in this sequence. Professor Singh would start off first, and we follow sequentially, followed by Mr. Rajesh, and then by Ajanta and Partha. And finally, we would come to you to hear the youth's voice. After that, I would give you a presentation on the issue of shifting cultivation. So let's hear the panelists. Professor Singh, please go ahead.
Thank you. Thank you very much, Dr. Dhrupad Chaudhary. Since you are having very long experience in the shifting cultivation, you have spoke nicely. Now, when we are talking about the shifting cultivation, especially in context of Arunachal, now you see that since long, around 35 years, I am in this state. We are working different projects also on agroforestry, other things. Now you see shifting cultivation, as you mentioned that, that environmental degradation, soil erosion, or loss of forest definitely is taking place, and due to that, like a lower belt, like some other places, due to soil erosion, flood is taking problem. But now people, they have also realized that this shifting cultivation not possible for everyone, because it requires manpower, it requires a lot of care. So now people, they are coming towards this agroforestry system. That is the only alternative agroforestry system. Either we are going agri-hearty or agri-silvi or agri-pastoral, whatever that we are going. And now people, they are trying also, as you mentioned that, government is also trying to stop this shifting cultivation. Even in the month of February, March, in the capital, we'll see that a lot of big hoardings come that that people, they are not being allowed to cut any forest area, which is degrading, that landslide problems, other problems are taking. Now, only thing is that for motivating to the people, local people, only if forest department, agriculture department, horticulture department, if they develop some model, a sustainable model, and that model they can replicate, then only people, they can adopt. Otherwise, very difficult to motivate the people. That is that what we could notice here. Nowadays, you see that number of horticultural schemes that is running in state government, horticulture as well as agriculture. Even we know that 45% state government, they are giving 45%, NIBARD they are giving, and 10% that farmers, they have to give that amount. So, lot of youth, they are coming towards that. And recently, just I'll give one example here. In Yachuli area, I think that's one of the biggest guava orchard has been established. And you know that plant has come from all the way from Lucknow. They brought that one Lalit variety and Sweta, these two variety has been planted. So now people, they are coming on that permanent cultivation, and that is a good for their livelihood also. Now even that value addition purpose, processing unit also, this Bandar Deva is coming. So my suggestion will be, if people, they go for horticulture or agroforestry or that even dairy, poultry, combined they can do, that will be very good for their livelihood, as well as they can protect environment also. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Professor Singh. That was very crisp and very succinct. Can I request Mr. Rajesh?
Yeah, thank you so much. Coming to the shifting cultivation as a problem or a panacea, it's a challenge before us. But obviously, as it looks on the ground today, it has different challenges related to the productivity, challenges related to the practicing mode, challenges related to the ecological considerations. Now all these challenges are further accentuated because of the climate change also. But maybe the practitioner himself or herself may not be knowing all this. So my first take on this will be like to put this activity on a sustainable track. For that, we need to engage with the actual practitioners on field with the latest sustainable technologies to do agriculture. So extension education is the key. We have to get the technology at their doorstep and even on their farm. Maybe we have to think about on-farm trainings also to inculcate the habit of practicing sustainable agriculture first. And shifting cultivation definitely, if it is restricted and done in a scientific way, I mean to say sustainable way, definitely it's not a harmful activity. But then it cannot be reckless. It can't like exceed recklessly to cover all areas. As Professor Chaudhary already mentioned, yes, there could be wonderful models of coexistence between the local communities, practices like shifting cultivation and also forest conservation, provided we optimize the inputs and outputs from both the systems. So there has to be a sort of balancing out between what they can receive from shifting cultivation and what they can receive from the forest. So we have to perhaps think of a model, a working model, which will marry the benefits of forest conservation and also the benefits of sustainable shifting cultivation. So now maybe on immediate terms we can think of translating the existing practice to more sustainability. Maybe like we can think of like pushing more concepts of organic agriculture, maybe zero tillage. Of course, they are in the hilltops or in the higher reaches of Arunachal. They may not be actually practicing any mechanical agriculture to say that we should go for zero tillage. But then the ages-old practices of dibbling seedlings and seeds, they can also be considered very equal to zero tillage. So my point is that we should harness those sort of technologies and translate them into field action by giving on-site training, and then maybe like we can think of a system in which there is near to zero tillage sort of situation. In the areas where shifting cultivation is practiced, there is a following of organic cultivation principles, and there is a strong focus on building multi-tiers, as Professor Vinay Kumar already mentioned. Multi-tier systems which may combine agroforestry or agri-horti or agri-silvi, even including livestock according to the elevations. We can think of such sort of a multi-tier cropping patterns or production units will definitely yield many benefits. First of all, there is a income across the year, maybe from the crops like agriculture crops, or maybe from horticulture crops, or like annual crops like banana and so on. So income is assured all through the year. And second, we have hydrological and ecological functions similar to the ones that might or that would come from forested systems. So this is a real thing. We have to that ecological resilience, that ecological system functioning. That is the thing we need to harness for responding to climate change. Along with that can also be like a back support, a backstopper to handle the other sorts of issues like land degradation and biodiversity erosion, and even like reaping the benefits of maintaining the resources for cultural and traditional applications or uses. So these are the things perhaps we can do immediately, but long term definitely we have to have a reasoned approach in practicing shifting cultivation, like elevations which are critically vulnerable for erosion. Definitely we have to be very, very cautious. Where I think rather we should think of like options to substitute the food sources with some other means. then wherever it is possible, like in the plains or where there is like a chance of little soil erosion or slope related issues, definitely we can do it in a restricted way. But ultimately the chances, the policy pushing or the actual action in the field should move towards sustainable agriculture, which can include a mix of different things, like a shifting cultivation where possible, then a settled cultivation according to realities in the field or practical realities. And third, maybe like application of new and modern techniques, like community-based hydroponic units or community-based gardens, food production gardens. These sort of concepts can come. That can also be transformed further at a community level into food processing centers and connected further with value chains in the region or in the at country level also and further. And similarly, floriculture is yet another component we can build on to the multi-tier so-called shifting cultivation concept I am just talking about. So multi-tier approach will be the immediate one to control many of the situations, and obviously in the long term we have to have a bucket of options to meet the food security concerns, especially in the context of climate change, plus also to address the concept of conserving land resources at landscape level. Particularly like our land resources, we know the vulnerability. Our land resources are quite vulnerable, and that is also getting fast degraded because of repeated cultivation or poor soil coverage due to eroding biodiversity values. Now, coupling with these challenges, we have the additional challenge of climate change induced evaporation. So this is leading to loss of water plus migration of salt from lower levels. So over the time, unprotected lands will become far more sterile. So considering all these aspects, it will be always a good idea, definitely protect our natural resources like forest as such, and go for a basket of options for securing the food security, and that will yield the extent of resilience we required at a landscape level for biodiversity resources, for human consumption, and also for economic development. Thank you.
Thank you so much. That covers quite a lot of issues and covers quite a lot of areas which are of concern. And I think the suggestions that you put forward, Mr. Rajesh, are things which are practical, which can be woven into what we require to do. Thank you again. Can we now request Ajanta, please?
Okay. Hello, thank you, Drupada. As you have said, don't call me sir. Okay, and this is very interesting because what Rajesh ji was telling is exactly where I would take it forward. That really, when we work with communities, what they say, oh, they are very adamant. They don't try to listen to us. They have their own ways of working. So, but we have to understand that the farmers have been doing farming much earlier than we have started working on them. We have maybe studied agriculture, but the farming they have been doing over years, from generations. Fishermen, they are doing fishing over generations, and we have studied maybe pisciculture or marine science, biologists, and then working with them. Oh, they don't understand. This is science. They are doing all bad things. So what is the process by which we can really bring them on board? Because they are also facing the problems. They are trying to solve in their own ways, but science has advanced, human society has advanced. Let us bring all those resources, build on the traditional system, and think of how to go forward. And what Rajesh ji has said about value chain is very, very important, because what they feel. What I understand is that I would share again some cross learnings for Arunachal Pradesh, what I have experienced working in the mountains of Karshiang, Kalimpong, Darjeeling district in West Bengal. I have worked there since 2000. one. In phases I worked, but that was a wonderful learning for me also, that how you work and then you develop something, and how you have intended something and it has developed in certain ways and it is destroying the thing. So incentivization for the local communities is very important, and they never do. Rural livelihood is never one thing, like only rice or only some crops. Like sir was telling, Rajesh ji, that it is a basket of livelihoods. And in this basket of livelihoods, we have to give them options which are sustainable, like, because people always go for short term. I was discussing with him that when we go for beekeeping, I'm wearing this one bee because I feel that they are very big indicators of ecosystems, the bees as pollinators. So what is the beehive or beekeeping we will promote? Over Vindhyas, all the beekeeping that is promoted after Green Revolution is with Apis mellifera. It is a species which has come from the Italy, and during Green Revolution, when there was huge need for production for pollinator, they were brought. Beyond Vindhyas, further south, you won't find them. It's only Apis cerana indica, that is the Indian bee species. But above the Vindhyas, entire northern states, northeastern, West Bengal, all eastern region, it's Apis mellifera. And what is the harmful effect of this Apis mellifera? We still don't know, but maybe ecological changes happen very slowly. But one fine day we'll find that, okay, these species are missing. So our rock bee, the Apis dorsata, they come all the way in Sundarban. I've seen they coming all the way from the Himalayas during the mangrove blooming time into there. You'll see swarms of bees going around. And then now, when you are promoting beekeeping around those mangrove forests with this mellifera, they are gregarious, they're bigger in size. Not bigger than dorsata, but quite competitive. And we did a study, it has also come out as a paper, that if we see the bee foraging, at one point of time, if there are 5 dorsata and 5 mellifera, slowly the dorsatas are getting outnumbered, because they are very gregarious, the mellifera. Now we are promoting beekeeping. We think that we are doing an excellent thing, but what we are doing is a lot of ecological damage. So what I was trying to make in the earlier session was that after Industrial Revolution, beyond 1750s, we looked at economic development only. And then when economic development with profits, there were inequality, a lot of social issues were coming, wage, profit, this and that, a lot of humanitarian movements were going on. There were a lot of human issues, social issues that were coming. We were looking into education, social development. So economic and social development. After Second World War, when there were a lot of independent countries which developed, and they wanted to develop on their own, which is quite right. Now there was this natural resource depletion, and with more and more populations springing up in the South Asian region, we indulged into more and more agriculture. Like Green Revolution, we portrayed them as very good, but we all know what had happened after that time. I remember in geography writing very, very good things about Green Revolution. But now we all understand that it was a total mistake. And the first bell was rung by Raquel Kurtz in 1950, I think. The Silent Spring, that book, that the spring is there, but there are no humming sounds. There are no birds. Where have the birds gone? They are gone with the insecticides, pesticides. So that was the first time that the bell rang that economic, social and ecological development has to be there. And the benefits has to go on to on the 3 aspects, the economy, society and the ecology. And how can we, and who will sustain, if we look at today's thing, the climate change and sustainable future, who is going to sustain the future? It's for the people. It's the voice of the people. It's the communities, the marginalized communities who will sustain the future. Because you may live in Itanagar, but the biodiversities that you have to protect are in Pasighat, in Namdafa, in Eagle Nest, in many other areas, in Sundarban, in Hindu Kush Himalayas, in other forests. So who are living there close to it? Vulnerable communities who are dependent on those forest resources, natural resources, and they are the people whom we have to work with in order to have our future sustained. So I will just again share a model, because I believe in doing and learning from there. So can you please share the next slide? Hello? Is someone there? Yeah, I think it's coming. The next slide, please. Yeah. So again, this is a lake you have seen. It's a Namthing Lake in the Kershing Hills of Darjeeling district, and there lived a population, a species called salamander, and it was dwindling in Namthing Pokhri. It was in 2001. We were working on 7 endangered species and were surveying around the region and found that, oh my goodness, there is a Jor Pokhri salamander sanctuary, but there is no salamander there. Do you know why? Because the administrative people were very, I would say, dreamy enough to all concretize the bank, and they didn't understand that the banks cannot be concretized. The salamanders need to migrate, to hibernate during the winter times. So they should be open like muddy, like it happens. But they concretized it and entire population was gone. So there was only this population, salamander, which was surviving in the Namthing Lake. And we found that it was dwindling. And it is a species which lived over Jurassic period, middle Jurassic period. So you can see it's 164 million years they are living. And we human beings are trying to meddle and trying to eradicate it. So there were a lot of things, this salamander population. So what we started was conserving it. So the lake was used by the local drivers for washing their cars. There was a lot of pollution. And we started. Then what to do? You cannot just create a fence and say that, oh, you cannot do that. That's not the way. You have to build the community conservation models. Next. So the strategy was community mobilization, engage and empower the local people, find solutions together. You see, these are the salamanders. They don't know what are the salamanders. They have seen that, but what is the significance? They never knew. So we need to make them aware. Okay, do we need to conserve them? Do you think it's necessary? So all these discussions and dialogues started, and we have to think not them as beneficiaries. This word I really detest. Who are we really to benefit, give benefits to people? Let us think them as co-actors with us. They are our co-actors. Nothing of beneficiaries, so we wanted them to talk with them and build some solutions together, dialogue with the local government because the land is with the DM, fenced it with the barbed wire, planted trees around. You will see the difference that was made, facilitated ex situ breeding. We collected the larvae because it was all polluted water. We did some ex situ breeding and then larval rearing and then again released it. And it was very nice. It was, as many people were telling, we were all telling, ecosystem-based approach, finding nature-based solutions, and community-owned conservation models. We totally did it with the local communities. Next slide, please. And what is this process when we say, today Honorable Deputy Chief Minister was also saying community-based models, community-based approaches. So what is this? So it goes beyond participation, not just participation. Today we are participating, we are exchanging in dialogues, but we have to engage. Tomorrow when the young journalists will write about climate change, actions to be taken, then he or she is engaging in it. So taking some little steps around it. Then when he or she gets personal decision making. Okay, I'll not only write, but I'll go to the CCF and ask, yes, you are told what exactly you are doing. Okay, let's do something like this. So in independent decision making, when you are making, it's empowerment, that you are really into it then. And then you take the ownership. Okay, I can make the decisions on climate change. What I can do, I can influence people. Let me start. So individual works start. You start working independently, and you can work in groups, in committees, etc. And then comes stewardship. Your individual works gets into collective actions. You also take some more media people. As a youth, I started something, some more youths, and then you go into collective actions and take a form of the stewardship. When you take stewardship, that builds resilience, and that ensures sustainability because it transforms from one person to the other. So in this way, if you go on making circles around it, stewardship circles, steward circles, then the community conservation models work. Otherwise, if it's in my brain, and I just go there, okay, I have to make some community conservation model, it will not work. It has to, you generate it, but it has to grow on its own. So that seeds of transformations, transmissions has to be there, planted from the very beginning of it, is what I wanted to focus. Next slide, please. And you see the difference. In 2004, there was this Namting Lake. News was written on the board, the project name was written, and then 2016 you can see the plants have grown, and one of my friends says, oh, what do you say, news has done this and that? I didn't find any name of yours there. I said, really? Okay, so show me the picture, and that was this picture. 2016 he came and said that. I said that, oh my goodness, it's what I wanted. Namthing Pokri Bachao Committee, they have written their name there. And so that is what is required. It's not news anymore. And I said that, I felt like crying. I said that, oh, what a beautiful picture you have shown me. I don't want the name of news. But that the people has taken up the ownership. And the Biodiversity Board has given a board there that it is now declared as a conservation reserve. So they have done that. So we just initiated the process. And this is ownership established. And this is policy inclusion, where Biodiversity Board declares it a conservation reserve, and it goes on. So next slide, please. And what happened then? After 2 years, 2018, simultaneous benefits should go to economy, society, and ecology. Ecology part was missing. What we did is in 2006-07, I remember when the project ended, there were few people living around the lake, and we developed some homestay ecotourism around it. I remember in a small notebook I was saying, I wrote that 1 bucket of water, 5 rupees, 1 breakfast, so boiled eggs, this much. So all this was written. 2 families were promoting homestay tourism. But it turned out to be so good that homestay tourism, now this wastelands or everything, you see these buildings which are termed ecotourism, homestay tourism, but they are not really homestay tourism. It has changed the entire landscape of that area, Kashiang, the hills around Namthing. Ahaldara that you see there, it was a total land. You can see the Kanchenjunga, and it was our resting place. After the day's work, we used to go there. It was a very fine area, but now you see those homestays have come up in the name of homestay, and deforestation, wastelands, even agricultural lands are getting converted into homestays. Land use change is happening, and concretization of the hills are happening, which shouldn't be. And what we faced, next slide please. 2018, the same lake again came up with the problem statement. Namthing Pokri has started drying up. So previously it was salamanders not living, and now it's Namthing is drying up. Salamanders could not complete their cycles because the lake is drying up. So they were also dying before their larval is getting matured into adults. Springs, as sir was telling in the morning, our deputy chief minister, that springs are the sources of water. Those sources are getting seriously affected And it is affecting their agriculture, their daily lives, even drinking water scarcity. Because human life is dependent on these various biogeochemical cycles, and we have to understand that. Next slide. So again, we started spring rejuvenation, spring watershed management program. Because this concretization is this deforestation due to homestay ecotourism is what they say ecotourism, but there are no principles of ecotourism embedded in it. It's just multi-storied buildings which are coming up. So again, community mobilization, spring recharge. You can see one young guy we have given them ways to measure the spring water recharge, how the spring waters have to be recharged. They can measure it, very simple ways, but we have trained the youths and the women that you go and see how the water is decreasing. And what you have to do, there are plastics here and there. There is a lot of concretization up the hills so that the water is not percolating. So we are trying to develop trenches, make more afforestation upstream. The people are cleaning the plastics. Water users associations have been formed for spring rejuvenation. And next slide, please. And you can see a good homestay and this tourism. We are organizing meetings with them. That what should be the sustainable and responsible action, because they may not be knowing. It may be their ignorance. So we are having good people. A lot of people are coming. Sitong is a very good place now, very near to on the hills of the Namthing. It's a very lovable place. So the strategy is building opinion. First is to engage in that dialogic change model. So we are building opinion for sustainable principles to be integrated. Next slide, please. And beyond this, I just wanted to, I couldn't tempt, because I know Mr. Gumjum Haidar is there as the State Information Commissioner, and I felt that I should highlight this. I have 2 more slides, that conservation models should also focus on the climate literacy. Because climate literacy is the understanding of the anthropogenic influence on the climate and the influence of climate on human society. Many of us don't know that. And it is very, very important for the students and youth and the women, particularly the students and the youth, because they are the future citizens. They have to understand. Sometimes, otherwise they will go and always question. It will always lead to otherwise activism. Activism is very, very necessary to raise the voice, but it will not always give the solution. So along with activism, you need to understand that what exactly has to be done. What is the point where we are stuck? So where is the innovation? Where is the tweaking that are required? Next slide, please. So this climate literacy can generate awareness about the climate dynamics, the global micro situations, can develop conscious minds to address the challenges, build actions. Again, there's that lineage, science, community, and policy. These interfaces, the voice of the youth, women, they can develop. You won't find every youth to talk about that, but which youth will talk? You have to select. If you work with 10 people, maybe 1 will come out with that Greta thing that Mr. Gumjum was talking about. So this developing young minds is also very, very crucial, and that literacy is also required. And that is not like a book, and again, my daughter used to say, oh, you have given another subject, environmental science, to us. I said, this is not like that. That not another subject, but in a digital, interactive memes, audiobooks, interactive modes where they can really take part and showcase collective action. So you've seen that this World Wetland Day, we showed them some films on wetlands, how water bird lives. So they understand that, okay, the wetlands are so important for aquatic birds, and how this life is entwined. They know very well, their observation is very fine, but just we have to link the things so that they can develop their minds. So, and again, create those transformational impacts. They have I would say, that power to do that. Next. So I was looking again at the population structure. You see 2011 in the age group of, age group of 5 to 29, you see the maximum people are there. The pyramid is like this. So you have a very vibrant youth group of this, of Arunachal Pradesh, and all the powers in the universe are already ours. It is we who have put our hands in front of our eyes and say that it is dark. So we quote Swami Vivekananda, arise, awake, and stop not till the goal is reached, for making a climate resilient future for you, for all of you who are here in that age group. Next. And next, please. And I'm very, always I'm hopeful that it is the people who create dreams, and who sees dreams and then transforms these dreams into reality and creates transformations. And I have a lot of trust in this beautiful political will, the administrative sides, and the people of Arunachal Pradesh, people like Mr. Gumjum, people like young media. I have met some scientists from DST, Science and Technology. You will make it. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Ajanta. I think your presentation, as everyone was immersed in that. To me, there are 2 or 3 very important key messages that you have, which you gave, and which are very important for us to keep in mind as we look at development, right? The first one is people's science, that people also have, their knowledge is not a bookish knowledge, and it's something which is of empirical experience. It's through that they're gathering the knowledge. I used to always make this point during different conferences, that when you look at people, particularly farmers, the communities, the farmers do not have the luxury of failure, right? Whereas we, as researchers, have that luxury. If we are doing an experiment, we can do an experiment for 3 years, we are getting the funding to do that, we are getting our salaries. It fails, it doesn't matter to us. All we do is come up with a paper, a peer-reviewed one, and say that, well, we tried this, it didn't work. For the farmer, it means starvation for him and his family. So whatever they pick up as knowledge, whatever they develop as knowledge, they develop it through empirical experience, and they will pick only those which succeed. So if you want to cut short your investment and the time in developing a technology or a knowledge, the participatory co-development that you talked about is so important. It's something we don't talk about, we don't realize, but it's an investment that we have to do. Knowledge generation has to be co-developed. It's not only from the researchers of formal science. The second lesson, and again I think for development and development approaches, these were very key observations or key messages that you have. When you talked about the green revolution and you talked about bees, right? Now, why do I say that? The 2 examples that she gave, the bees, the introduction of Apis mellifera, and in the process, while we think that we have achieved the objective, we have honey production coming up, we have the beehives, we have more number of people doing that. Unknowingly, what we are doing is, as you introduce mellifera, you are slowly moving away, or you are erasing the habitat and the area for the local bees, whether it is dorsata, whether it is the Himalayan rock bee, or any of these. Now, it has implication not just for the bee population or for honey production and the beeswax and other products that you get. It has far-reaching implications. One of the services that bees give are pollination services, right? So what would happen is there are a number of plant species which are dependent on bee pollination. They disappear. And they disappear because pollination is not happening, right? So when we are introducing anything, it's important to understand what the consequences will be. It may be very good, but what are the flip side of it? Are we taking a right decision? Similarly with Green Revolution. And I think it was, it's been talked about. In fact, Dr. Swaminathan himself reinvented that word, and he called it the new green revolution that we have to bring about, right? So green revolution has its drawbacks, and therefore it is important to keep in mind that when we are proposing something as an alternative, when we are proposing something to be brought in, what we need to see is what are the cost benefits in terms of not just the economics, but also ecological costs which are there. So I think your presentation, and I think the last thing which is important and I shouldn't miss, is the whole nuances of participation and engagement, the institutional build-up, the governance structure that you require. This is very, very important. For any of the interventions that we want, we have to ensure that we have not just participation, but we move towards a stewardship which needs to come about, as she showed in her presentation. Thank you very much. Let me move now to Partha, and I would request him to bring in. You have a mic there, or you're going to use this? Okay, all right. Go ahead, Partha.
artificial intelligence, machine learning, etc. Even robotics. People are doing fantastic work out of, measuring soil moisture, vegetation, presence, sediment, everything from a distance, even without going there. So it's not impossible to do, to have a good assessment of all those areas which are probably undergoing shifting cultivation at this moment all over Northeast India. So we just need a kind of, dedicated platform or dedicated group of people. But the question is, how many people are working on this problem right now as from research point of view? We need, of course, these are intricate problems. The answers will come from dedicated research. If that effort is not there, we are not going to learn anything actually. So therefore, I believe that a lot of research and other need to be done, which should be supported by state machineries or other, infrastructure. So this, this is briefly, my take on this, and I think that we need very intensive mapping of, we can do a few pilots, taking small hot pockets. For example, 2 months back, I was having an online meeting. I was part of an online meeting which were between NECTAR, Northeast Center for Technology Application Reach, where I am partly involved as a consultant and project advisor, and Government of Mizoram. The reason was that in April last year, there was a huge forest fire in Mizoram, April 21. That started in a particular village in Lunglei district, but then it spread out to 6 more districts. It was huge. It actually occupied international, news space because of its largeness and probably till now the largest forest fire and all that. Then Government of Mizoram was seeking solutions because they have a more and more forest fires happening. And this particular forest fire, they believe, happened because of uncontrolled burning, which was started as part of a shifting cultivation process by one of those communities. So they were thinking about how to control this, and that process is going on. But during the discussion, when we were talking about what could be done, some people who didn't have much, knowledge about shifting cultivation, they talked about, if it is so hampering, it is so dangerous, why don't you ban it? And but officials, forest department officials from Mizoram, they talked very frankly that it is not possible to ban it, number one. That is their only livelihood. Number two, it is not desirable to ban it because there is no alternative, right? So they are now, I don't know what's happening there now, but they are of course thinking about progressive solutions like, educating. But then again, the problems like, people are not willing to go to that kind of remote area. It takes, you have to walk a lot, do trekking. You can't take your vehicle down there. So many things. But then, different kind of solution like unmanned aerial vehicle, drone and all that to do some special mapping. Those are probably under progress now with NESAC and all that. So that's why I believe that, people understand the limitations. People understand that this is very basic to people and people's life. It cannot be banned. But, definitely there are many ways to probably give it a different kind of shape. And if there are too many people doing shifting cultivation in very few areas so that their fallow period has become so reduced, then definitely there is a need to transform some of those people, population depending solely and only on shifting cultivation to other types of climate resilient farming. There's no doubt there. But if you have a core population doing shifting cultivation sustainably, and they don't have any other alternative, I don't think why should you run after them. I don't find any way, but there are many other things to do actually. Crack your head against. But if some group of people, they are not disturbing you, they're doing it sustainably, but you are sure that they're doing it in the right way, There are not too many, and they have enough. But so blanket ban is not desirable. That's my point. Until we can give them, good. And a world over, you see, Drupata has given example of seen so many all over the world doing, because this is the most primitive, this is the most fast kind of, that agricultural farming that people learn to do. And as far as hill farming is concerned, hill farming has always been traditional. In traditionality is the dominant mode. And we have not seen much of modern innovation and science and technology giving solutions as an alternative to hill farming. Plain farming is different. So many innovations have come. Do you agree? Hill farming has remained predominantly traditional in mode. So doing something forcefully will be detrimental, will be counterproductive. And now we have a lot of science and technology innovation to do the right kind of study, right kind of assessment, so that a good kind of progressive decisions and policies can be made. And let us do that. Let us do that as pilot studies. Let us do that as pilot assessment. Let the beginning be there from Arunachal Pradesh. Because if we somehow resolve this problem for Arunachal Pradesh, that will be a great contribution to sustainability. Sustainability of forest resources, sustainability of biodiversity, sustainability of livelihoods. Because like Drupada, many of us are strong believers that shifting cultivation actually conserves a lot of biodiversity. It creates a lot of biodiversity. It's not monocropping, right? And I didn't believe until I probably started reading Professor P.A. Ramakrishnan's books, where he has analyzed, doing chemical and soil analysis, everything. Said, this is not exploiting. This is enriching actually. Unfortunately, the right kind of research didn't proceed beyond that. So that's my overall take on the thing. The other side I will not speak because there is no time. Over to you.
Thank you, Partha. I think two important points that you made, recalling Bruno and Jack's seminal work, I would call, on the Himalayas, and looking at what causes or what are the reasons why you have sedimentation in the rivers. I also recall that around the same time or a little bit later, there was a publication or the view from CSC, Anil Agarwal and Sunita had written about that, saying that man-made deforestation is not the only reason for soil erosion from the Himalayas. They're natural processes. Because the Himalayas are young, the soils are fragile, and therefore it depends on what sort of land use you have and other natural causes which bring about the landslides and the soil erosion in there. So that's an area which really needs to be looked at. And when we we immediately blame shifting cultivation, I think we are doing injustice. And Ritu is here. He talks about climate justice. This is one of the issues we need to take up and say, look, I mean, don't blame people for their livelihoods when you're not giving them alternatives. Shifting cultivation is not the cause of soil erosion. That I will come on later. And of course, as you say, it's very important when we are looking at management of shifting cultivation to look at what is the cycle. Are we talking about short cycle shifting cultivation, or are we talking about traditional long fallow shifting cultivation? Because the approach to the two are very, very different, right? Thank you once again, Partha. Now let me move, and it's my pleasure to call on Ima to have your views. And I think the views that I would look forward are two. One as a journalist, as a media person, and two as the youth. Because we are talking about things, and as it's become cliched, but when we talk about resources, we say we haven't inherited from the past generation, we have borrowed from the young, right? And therefore, it's very important to hear your views. Thank you. Please go ahead.
Thank you so much, sir. before moving forward, I would say like I've been informed about this panel on a very short notice. I was just having dinner there and Heather sir came, oh, you want to be the panelist? I said, all right, right. So my take on it, sir, won't be as profound as esteemed panelists out here. Whatever I'm going to share today is more through my personal experience, you know, what I've observed. It might be wrong, you know, it is actually very subjective that whatever I'm going to share. Right. For shifting cultivation, to be honest, I grew up in a very urban setting, so I have a very little knowledge about it. But what do I have observed now? I cannot speak on a on a technical or scientifically. I cannot explain it, right? So for me, it's like yeah, we do practice shifting cultivation, but now when we think of it. For example, my village, where I come from, Don, it's getting empty day by day. So that if the village is getting empty, the practice, the farming, cultivation itself is getting narrower day by day. This is one of the points that we need to really ponder upon. If we talk about shifting cultivation and soil erosion and its consequences on environmental aspect, I would say right now it is actually less relevant in comparison to the modern threats that we are getting right now, right? Yes, yesterday I had a conversation with one of my friends who stays in Zero. I said, I would love to visit Zero and see the, you know, farming out there, though it is not shifting, it is more of agro-pisciculture, if I am not wrong. Yeah, agro-pisciculture. So I said, I want to go and experience those things. Then he said, it's better you go as early as possible because the people who are actually practicing it, those are the last people, right? So if you really want to go and experience it, this year would be the right timing because once they die, nobody is going to practice that. So if we really talk about on an environmental aspect, shifting culture would be very less irrelevant. One of the threats that we are facing right now, especially in terms of Arunachal, is the modern threats. For example, there are being construction activities going on a very high level, right? And the place where we are standing right now, this place itself, if for your information, you might not be acquainted with it, it's a Itanagar Wildlife Sanctuary. This is supposed to be actually a wildlife sanctuary, but there are construction going on. So I think, you know, and when coming back to the topic, I would say, shifting cultivation has been practiced by our forefather for generation. That is the only practice that they know. Like ma'am, you all rightly stated that we cannot just go and say that stop it right there, right? And Rajesh sir also stated that we need to come up with a sustainable method so that it will be feasible for the farmers. And as the farmers are a little adamant in this aspect because these are the only things they know. And we also have to understand in Arunachal, we do not practice agriculture more for the business aspect. It's more of self-sustaining, right? So this is not just a way to earn money, or it is more of like a livelihood. We work, we feed upon that crop. So on that aspect, I would say what we really need to do right now is to come up with a sustainable way or more of a seamless method, so that it will be viable for the farmers out there, so that they can understand, you know, the nuances of it, the different aspect of it. It will be easier for them to grasp it, right? So yeah, that would be one of the things. And we really need to, if we are really serious about bringing changes, like actual changes in the environmental context, is that we need to move out of the discussion is also important. We cannot deny that, right? We need to move out of discussion and start practicing. Pake declaration is going on. It's quite great that government is coming up with that. But we really hope, as a journalist and seeking out the situation out here, we really hope that, you know, the government really work upon it, because there has been some situation that the paperwork tak reh jata hai, right? So the work is just out there. But the government is also coming up with some good initiative. For example, they are handing out loans Is it my audio? Like, so, for example, they're handing out loans to the farmers who really are like the modern farmers, like the modern generation farmers who really want to take farming as their profession. So the government is handing out loans, which is also a good initiative, right? At the same time, there are youths who are coming up with new sort of farming. For example, we have a friend who practice mirror yasai. It's basically hydroponic culture. So they are coming up with new, way to sort of bring that culture alive and to amalgamate in their day-to-day practice as well. So yeah, that would be there. I think we need to really come up with an effective, how to say it, way to really aware the farmers, and so that they can understand as well. They won't understand the scientific solution if you go and explore. See, this is the graph, and after 10 years, if you continue doing this, they won't understand at all. So we need to come up with a solution that is seamless for them, and at the same time, it's easier for them to grasp as well, because that's the only way they know. That's the only thing they know their whole life. So thank you so much, sir. I hope I made sense, right? So
Thank
yeah,
you, Emma.
thank you.
I think you did. And yes, we need to give her a hand. But to me, you made a statement which is very, very important, and it's true not just for Arunachal, but I would think that it's true for across the mountains and across many parts of the world. And that is the youth losing interest in agriculture, right? Now, it's a very serious matter, and we need to think, why are the youth losing the interest? To me, I think there are two reasons which are very important. One, that agriculture has never been looked at or promoted as something which is also profitable. And when I say profitable, I don't mean it in a negative way, but more in terms of giving the household a livelihood which is sustainable and which enhances the well-being of that household, right? So we have to look at ways in which we are changing the approach to agriculture. Second, technologies. And today, in a world which is globally connected through the internet, technology or access to technology is not difficult. I mean, go on the social media or go on the internet, there's so many technologies which are there, there's so many innovations which are there, right? And this is what we need to bring in. Now, important point to note, and this is where the mismatch or the disconnect is, right? That while we have aspirations of the youth, of the people, our planning at the government level, we are missing out on this, because we are looking at certain of the targets or certain of the goals and objectives which we have got to meet nationally, right? But we are not looking at the means through which we can do it. We are not looking at ways in which we make youth a part of that planning process. So, multi-stakeholder approaches in terms of what to do in terms of planning is something which has to come about, right? And this is something we cannot avoid. We have to bring that in for having more ownership, as Ajanta was pointing out, right? Anything that you do, unless and until you have ownership on that, it is not going to spread. And I can tell you, working on scaling, right? This is one of the basics, that if you want scaling to be done of any intervention, you have got to ensure that the people are on board. They are co-active actors, and we do it collectively. It's not a government thing, right? We are equally actors in that. So from that point of view, I think, your intervention, though it's, very, very spontaneous, and it's something which has come about at the last moment, you have brought about two very important points. Thank you for that. And I look forward to more interactions with you all. Okay. Now, having heard the panelists, I'm going to impose on you, right? As I said, I have been working on shifting cultivation for a very long time, right? Recently, I was also involved with the Niti Aayog, looking at how we can bring about transformation, managing shifting cultivation, how we can have a transformative approach, right? Now, what does that mean? As you pointed out, Mr. Rajesh, right? We need change. Shifting cultivation won't go away overnight. But what are the approaches that we can have in which we have a blend of the strengths of the traditional, but we can imbibe some of the new things which are there, and we look forward into the future of how we go about, right? Now, my presentation, and can we have the presentation, please, the PowerPoint? My presentation is not going to work, or I'm not going to present, the background on shifting cultivation and all that. I'm just going to point out on what has been the approach and till now, and what are what I call second generation issues which are emerging because of the transformation, right? And these second generation issues have very serious implications for the people, for ecological health, and for the economy. And I also give you at the end a few examples that are drawn from South and Southeast Asia of innovations by the community of bringing about transformations in this system. How have they imbibed? What have they done, right, to bring the change which is required? Can I have the first slide, please? Okay. When we talk about shifting cultivation, this is the image that you get. Burning hillsides. After the burning is over, you have this pockmarked, scarred landscape, right? And because of that, it's the government or the common perception is that it's destructive, it's primitive, economically unviable, and therefore you require to replace it. Next slide, please. What that misses out, however, is the science behind shifting cultivation, the traditional practice and the ecological wisdom behind shifting cultivation. And in that, we ignore the fact that shifting cultivation actually is not just an agricultural practice. It's an agriculture and forest management practice done on the same plot of land, but it is separated in time. So it's sequential, and also it's rotational at the landscape level. So you don't do your shifting cultivation in one plot only. You do a cultivation by clearing the vegetation there, probably burning that vegetation or the debris which is left after you have taken out, the biomass for use, and then you'd cultivate, usually anything from 1 or 2 years to around 5 years, as the Tangkuls do in Manipur. The Tangkuls cultivate a plot of land for 5 years, which suggests what? That actually shifting cultivation does not deplete the soil of soil fertility. There is soil fertility in there. They could continue for a longer time. But as Tangkul farmers will tell you, that if you go on cultivating in that land, it becomes very difficult to manage the weeds. Therefore, you require more labor to do weed clearing than for doing the cultivation. So it's profitable both in terms of labor as well as in terms of the input that you have to put in to move to another plot and allow that plot to rejuvenate, to recover, to regenerate. And in many places where you have a long enough cycle, more than 10 years, what you find is the forests come back. The forests are there, which are secondary forests. They're thick and they are closed canopy forests, not degraded forests. I give you examples along the way in Arunachal. When you come down from zero, just before you are coming into the hydroelectric project there, Ranganadi, if you look out on the hillside, on the other side of the river, you'll find very thick forests, very good quality forests, right? But they're actually shifting cultivation fallows, right? And these fallows are at least about 30 to 40 years old. And the reason you can have that long fallow is because population is less, pressure on land is less, and therefore people can do their cultivation and allow the fallow to be there for around 40 years. Across the northeast, even today, you have many areas where you have fallows of 50 years. And they become thick forests, close canopy, and even foresters mistake them as primary forests, not secondary forests, right? So this is the first myth that we have got to break. Shifting cultivation is not only an agricultural practice. It's an rotational agroforestry practice, right? First thing. The regenerating fallows are an integral part of shifting cultivation. You don't have the fallows, you don't have sustainable shifting cultivation. As Partha was pointing out, many areas, today the fallow cycle is just 3 years or 4 years. So you won't have forests. Forget about the forests. You just have scrub coming back. You can't call that shifting cultivation. That is rotational farming. It's already transformed into another form of cultivation. And it is wrong to call those as shifting cultivation, right? So this is a fact which is often ignored or not known at all. And that's the reason when we have any of the approaches to shifting cultivation management, we are actually, we are bringing in this second generation issues. So, next slide, please. What is shifting cultivation? So, as this schematic diagram shows, you are clearing a forest patch or a vegetated patch. You take out the debris for whatever use that you have, fuel wood, house building, food, furniture building, fencing, even your stills for your agricultural crops. The rest of the debris, you will dry them probably for around 3 or 4 months, and then you burn it. Why is the burning done? The burning is done because it helps in transforming that debris into nutrients in a very short term period. It also saves on labor. We blame shifting cultivators for the fire and the burning. But if you look into forestry and land management, you'll find that fire is used as a management tool by foresters and rangeland managers. Right? You don't have to go far. As you're going to Assam, go to Kaziranga, this time of the year, right?
February, March.
Yeah. This is when you'll find a lot of areas being burned, right? Why is it burned? Because you burn the dry grass, as the rain comes, you'll have a shoot of the young grass shoots, right? A bloom of that. And that's a very simple ecological principle. It's called compensatory growth, right? So if you want something to grow fast, you bring in an intervention which will allow it to grow again, right? So this is what happens in shifting cultivation as well. So you have an annual crop or cultivation for 1 year, 2 years, in some places for 3 years, and then they fallow that, right? And this fallow cycle, if it is long enough, you'll have secondary forests coming back. What is happening today is this long cycle has been disrupted, right? So as you disrupt that, you will have shifting cultivation becoming of shorter fallows and you have the forest completely taken away from that ecological dynamics. Next slide, please. For the shifting cultivators, fallows are essential. Without regenerating fallows, there is no shifting cultivation. And they know that you have to manage, you have to introduce fallow management as you're clearing the land for your agriculture. So what they do is, many places they will lob the trees, or they will coppice them, or they allow tree trunks to be left behind, root stubs to be left behind, and these then regenerate as the cultivation goes on, right? In a study that we did in Ukhrul, covering around 8 to 10 villages, in this clearing and in this fallow management, early during clearing, the farmers were conserving 71 different species spread across 38 families, right? 38 botanical families. I don't mean human families, right? So that's the diversity that they are conserving even during the clearing. And this is important. Can I have the next slide? Because the farmers realize fallows are the backbone of shifting cultivation. Take away the fallows and your backbone is gone. You can't stand up. You can't have shifting cultivation, right? Now, come to the climate change angle. What does that mean? If you look at a shifting cultivation landscape, right, and this is common even here outside Itanagar. I remember when I was here, I could see this here. You will see it anywhere where there is shifting cultivation. And this photograph also shows you, gives you an idea, right? A shifting cultivation landscape is a mosaic of agricultural fields, regenerating fallows, and mature forests. So you have different types of vegetation. And the young fallows, where the vegetation is coming up fast, has a faster growth rate, which means that carbon sequestration is at a higher rate in these young fallows, right? And when we look at the calculations and we look at the budget, the carbon budget which is there, you will find, and the research tells us this, that during this young growth stage, there is more carbon sequestered than the carbon which is lost during burning. Similarly, when you're talking about soil erosion, Partha, the calculations which are done, ICR has done that. They have done the soil erosion during the agricultural phase. They have not looked at the fallow phase because they don't even recognize that shifting cultivation has a fallow phase. As a result, you will have high soil erosion and you're not balancing the soil conserving practices or effect which comes out in the fallows, right? So from the climate change point of view, if we look at a shifting cultivation landscape, these landscapes could potentially be carbon sinks and not sources. And therefore, if you have this sort of management, you're actually contributing to mitigation of climate change. Next slide, please. Now, what are the drivers of change? And I come back to the context of development. Government policies, of course, as I pointed out, but also is the communities themselves, as you were saying, Ima, is the communities as well who want to change, right? Because they find shifting cultivation has not been supported enough commercially, right? Governments have not brought about this support where shifting cultivation products are semi-processed, processed, or value added. But then, if you look at the market, what you find is there are a lot of products which are going in an unorganized manner into the market. So there is a demand for shifting cultivation products. We haven't recognized that, and we need to recognize that, both in the agricultural phase as well as in the fallow phase, right? So that's the first thing that we have to do. Transformations, as I say, is both policy as well as community driven. So we can't do away with transformations. We can't say that, look, shifting cultivation has a lot of good things, don't change it. The governments want it, the communities themselves want it, right? So how can we go about bringing about this change, retaining the strengths of shifting cultivation, avoiding the pitfalls which are there, right? Next slide, please. So what has the government approach been? And I'm not talking about just India. You go anywhere, this is the approach. Promotion of wet rice cultivation to ensure food security. Of cash crops for cash generation, right? But never products from shifting cultivation. And till plantations come up, there's a gestation period for horticulture, for any of the things that we heard Professor Singh talk about. There's a gestation period. What do the shifting cultivators do? What do they eat? Where do they find their cash generation from? They will have to depend on shifting cultivation. So this cycle which is there cannot be broken unless you have the alternate solutions in place, and then you can say, okay, now you have the alternatives, it's your choice. You want to continue with shifting cultivation or you want to change? The choice has to be the communities. The choice has to be by the shifting cultivators, not we as experts or as policymakers saying that you need to change. Give the choice to the people. They will change, right? Let's go to the next slide. So when you look around in these areas, what you find is there is a lot of plantation or cash crops which have come up. But mind you, the policy for replacing shifting cultivation, if you recall, was also to conserve forests, right? Today you look around, you find plantations, but where are the forests? The forests are gone, right? Next slide, please. And that happens because replacement of fallows which settle agriculture will result in a permanent land use and land cover change, unlike in shifting cultivation where it's temporary, right? And this leads to depletion of forest cover and ecosystem services. And that's because shifting cultivation is not recognized as a rotational sequential agroforestry practice. Is looked upon as either only an agricultural practice. In the fallow phase, it goes under the forest subject. There's a duality in this which is not recognized, and we have to change our policies and our approaches in that. Next slide. Now, it also means that you're losing on ecosystem services. You will have losses in provisional services, both in terms of biodiversity, the agro-biodiversity which is there, and also the biodiversity from the fallows, right? So that goes off because you have replaced the fallows with plantations. Regulatory services, hydrology, there'll be a rapid depletion in water retention capacity, and you'll have more surface runoffs, resulting in what Partha was talking about, the siltation and sedimentation in the plains. Soil nutrient cycling will be affected, so you will not have good soils in the uplands. It cannot support productivity without external inputs. Biological diversity and the associated services. These are all going to go as you replace fallows. Next, but more important, shifting cultivation is known for the agro-biodiversity. Agro-biodiversity to the tune that in a shifting cultivation field, you could have anything from 20 to 40 different species of crops being grown. Within those, you would have varieties or land races. So you have a huge agrobiodiversity which is there. Why is this important, right? For the farmer, this diversity is their risk insurance. If one crop fails, there are others which will do well, and they will not starve, right? And it is also the basis of building resilience, both of the system as well as of the farmer, right? Now, in today's context, I talked in the morning about food security and nutritional security. In today's context, with climate change coming in, you require stress-tolerant crops. You require what we call as nutrient-packed, nutrient-rich crops, right? And to breed this, to come up with new crop varieties, you require a whole diversity of different land races from which you're going to build this. You do away with this sort of rich agrobiodiversity rich systems, you're cutting down on your chances of growing or developing new crop varieties, because these varieties found in systems such as shifting cultivation are the building blocks of tomorrow's stress-tolerant crops. You do away with this, and with settled agriculture, this is what happens. You reduce drastically the agrobiodiversity which is there. This will go. Next slide, please. Customary norms, right, of excess and benefit sharing. Now, when you read the old literature, or even the new literature, and I remember, a number of publications which were done by colleagues that Professor Singh and me, we know very well. The introductory, paragraphs talk about a primitive and very difficult to understand customary norms, right? The reason is that for most decision makers, for most researchers, we know about the private property regimes. We hardly understand the common property regimes. And shifting cultivation functions on the principles of common property regimes. It means it will ensure tenurial security universally in a village. Everyone in the village, every household has access to land. They may not own it, and ownership is common in most of the places. But even if you have people who can't own that land, they have access to land. You replace shifting cultivation with settled agriculture, you're changing that regime. From a common property regime, you're coming into a private property regime. And that means you are giving rise to landlessness and tomorrow's poor, and you're depriving access rights of the poor. Now, this is a very important and a very serious pitfall. This also has an implication which is statutory and legal. As I said, people do not recognize that shifting cultivation is a dual practice of agriculture and forestry. During the forestry phase, for governments and for the revenue, they look at that fallow as a property which is a state property. If you look at categorization, land use categorization all over, particularly in India and in the colonial areas, you'll find there's a term called unclassed state forests, right? The unclassed state forests are nothing but the fallows. And these are definitely not belonging to the state. It belongs to the community, right? Now, as a result, in many of the places, and particularly in areas like Myanmar, these are areas which have been, they have been taken over by the government for promoting agriculture, depriving the practitioners and the traditional communities of access and ownership of their ancestral territorial areas. That's the second pitfall which is there, and this is very important to remember, right? That while we bring about transformations, we have got to ensure that you are not changing the property regimes. Otherwise, there's a lot of issues which come up. And I would go this far to say, knowing that my media friends are here as well, but I would assert that a lot of problems that we have in the Northeast which are emerging because of this issue. People are deprived of their access to land, and this brings about unrest, social unrest which is there. It brings about conflicts among communities. And these are things which are, they are unintentional because the decision makers or the people who are bringing about the change are not aware that the action which is being taken will bring about this sort of ramifications and results. So we have to be very, very careful when we are managing shifting cultivation. Next slide, please. Now, let me come to what are the action which needs to be taken. And this is important for any state that you have shifting cultivation in. One, as I said, you cannot have transformation overnight. It will take time. So meanwhile, what are the ways that we can go about? One way to do that is we need to increase the cultivation phase of shifting cultivation. Instead of 1 or 2 years, can we make the farmer stay in the same plot of land for a little bit longer? Maybe 3, maybe 4, maybe 5 years, right? But to do that, what we require to do is we need intensified, focused research on rain-fed agriculture. You go around any of the agricultural universities today, anywhere in the world, right? You'll find there's a lot of research on how you improve or increase productivity of rice varieties, of maize, of other crops which are found in conventional agriculture. But you hardly have research to look into increasing productivity in rain-fed areas or rain-fed agriculture. This is an investment we have got to make if you want changes in the uplands. Next slide, please. We need to learn from traditional practices as well. The promotion of agroforestry, such as the alder-based agroforestry which is there. And this is typically found in Nagaland and in Manipur. You'd get it in Myanmar as well, where people use alder trees, which is a nitrogen fixer, in their cropping fields. And they do both agricultural seasonal crops, but also retain the elder in there. Now, elder coppices, the plants that you see in this photograph are actually the elder trees which have been coppiced, and these trees are at least 100 years old. Now let that sink in. 100 years old, right? It means these are trees or species which can go on forever. You can bring about sustainability in that. You need to adopt such agroforestry practices. Next slide, please. We need to adopt and we need to nurture and promote what are known as forest gardens. Again, in the uplands, Professor Singh was talking about horticulture. There are many horticultural crops. There are many spice, species which are there, which would grow and which would contribute to the economy, agricultural economy of the states. But what we need to do is merge that in with the fallows, with the regenerating fallows, and you'd have forest gardens. In places like Indonesia, in Sumatra, they have gardens which are around 50 years old, and you have a plethora of crops which are put in there. Most of these are commercial crops. They have commodity value in there. The first few years, you have crops which are consumption crops, but later it is commercialized, right? So these are the blends that we require. Next slide, please. Of course, we need to promote or support community forestry. You need the ecosystem services. And as an anecdote, I would give you one example, one experience that I had. We were working in the IFAT project in Garo Hills. And Garo Hills is very badly, the shifting cultivation fallows have come down drastically, 3 years or 4 years at the most. People are slowly getting into terraced rice cultivation. So we were promoting that in some of the villages. And one of the questions that I asked the villagers was, okay, if you're going to bring this in, how are you going to ensure that you have sustainability? And there was an immediate answer from all of them. We require the water. Without water, we can't do the terrace cultivation. So I said, how are you going to do that? I said, we know where the source is, so we're going to conserve the catchment forests, right? And these are the results. This you get all over Northeast India. So we need to support that. When you support that, again in the IFAT project, in NC Hills, what is now Dimahaso, the project team then teamed up with the forest department. And the forest department, you had the FDA, right? And there were funds available. So from the FDA, the forest department gave the communities this fund, right, which could be used for any of their livelihood activities on condition that you are conserving the catchment forests, right? So again, there's a partnership that you are talking about, right, which needs to be brought in. Next slide, please. This is in regard to planning. There's a need to introduce, again, interacting or engaging the community as co-actors. Because ultimately, you're talking about land use in their area. You're talking about land use that they are going to do, right? So, perspective land use planning, which takes into consideration two things. What are their future aspirations? What sort of land use, what sort of crops or horticulture they bring in? Where they're going to do that? Which are the areas where they want to continue with shifting cultivation or change that? Where are the areas that they will do the conservation of catchment forests and other natural resources? And it's a very effective and a very easy thing to do. Here we did it on 2D, which is just a mapping that you did. The next slide, and that's the result in one of the villages where they clearly mark out which are the areas for different land use. The next slide, please. And you can also do this in a 3-dimensional participatory modeling. Now, it's expensive, but the cost could be brought down. But what are the advantages? You have land use done there, but as I mentioned, mind you, in the uplands you do not have cadastral surveys. You can actually then quantify the amount of land under different land use, because this can be put on a GIS platform. You use topo sheets and you're making these 3D models, right? And this is something which has worked wonderfully for planning. In this particular village, they were having a cycle of 15 years. After they made the model and they were discussing on how to do the next cultivation, they reduced the area under shifting cultivation per household, which resulted in new areas which they could keep aside for the next cultivation, and an increase in fallow cycle to 40 years. Mind you, from 15 years, you go into 40 years, right? You can actually do that, right? And you can use a GIS platform. So with that, this mapping that becomes available to the policymakers and the decision makers as well, right? So that's the beauty of this. The last intervention which is required, which I haven't put a slide, is promotion of home gardens. You have kitchen gardens, but you can have larger gardens which are extended home gardens, where you can bring in a lot of the traditional crops which are grown in shifting cultivation into these home gardens, and you have the diversity which is maintained. When we introduced this in NERCOM, in the IFAT project, we had just started, but it went on like wildfire. Today, it is one of the most important interventions which are there for the NERCOM project. And my recommendation to the Niti Aayog was that the government should look at allocation of funds. One, recognize home gardens as an agricultural land use, because it's not formally recognized. So once you recognize that, you will have to make budgetary allocations. And there's support for the promotion of home gardens. This helps not just the family, it helps the woman in the household as well, because for her now, it is easy to get the nutritional diet that she wants from outside her, just outside her door, and cuts down on the drudgery. For any of you who are familiar with shifting cultivation, you know that every second day, the lady of the house carries back a lot of the crops for her home consumption, right? And sometimes these fields are about 2 to 3 hours away from home, and she has to carry that load, right? So this is a reduction in drudgery that you bring about. Additionally, it helps in improving nutrition in the household, right? So that is very, very important. The next please. Now, I want to leave you all with an image here. This is a map that you see, which was done by Spencer in 1966. The blue areas are the areas where you still have, in 1966, you had very active shifting cultivation going on in these areas. Let's have the last slide. This is a Landsted image, right? Done in 2010. Look at the areas where you have the forest. It's in the same areas that you have shifting cultivation. So if you replace shifting cultivation, you have the danger of losing out, among other things, forests as well. Thank you very much. Now, I have taken a lot of time in this, and it was intentional, right? Because as you see now, the perceptions on shifting cultivation would be clearer, right? You see the nuances which are there. And it's important for us to understand the nuances, because otherwise we are going to bring about management plans which actually increase the second generation issues. And that's something that we want to avoid. Managing shifting cultivation and bringing about the change is something that not only we as development planners want or desire, it's also the community's aspiration. But we need to do it in a way where we do it properly, and we do it in a way that the community can do it, and they are a co-actor in that change which is there. And I think as I look at the program, I see that there were planned to be interactions with the students. So are we going to have that as well? The interactions? So I open up to the floor. Can we have some mics, and you're open to questions to any of the panelists. Please say your name, your affiliation, and to whom the question is directed. Can we pass on a mic?
Hello.
Please introduce yourself.
Bharti ka hai, Bharti? Prakriti? Bharti?
Good evening, sir. I'm Anand. I'm a research scholar, and I'm an anthropologist as well. I have a question for Ajanta ma'am. She had her earlier presentation, and she talked about carbon finance model, where in the context of investment-induced development, ma'am, do you think that the carbon finance model will help us to restore our ecosystem? And could you please elaborate the carbon finance model and how this model will safeguard the rights of indigenous peoples, land, forest, water, if it goes into the hands of the corporate sector? I have another question regarding the wildlife conservation or wildlife conservation lists. So it's a very curious. I was very curious about this wildlife conservation right now. So what I was thinking about is that are we as a human being, as in wildlife conservation list, becoming more racist? You know, so in conserving some species like one-horned rhinos, tigers, or rather than looking at other species, which are small species like in the context of Assam, so such as like white-winged wood ducks. These ducks have been declining in a very faster rate. And finally, I had one other question, which is regarding the Sweden farming. Do Sweden farming generate carbon footprints? Thank you.
Do you want to
Okay.
go first?
Okay, so if I take on your question, yes, you are right that every business comes with its good and bad. So it's not that carbon finance model is 100% okay, but you have to bargain. You have to fit in into the context that you are working. So I said that it is important to choose the carbon finance partners who are working. So suppose if I give the contextual framework of how we worked in the Sundarban, the main question was how do we, when we are faced with such an Ayla like a cyclone, we need upscale restoration, we need crores of money. It was not there. So we were thinking of how to get the funds. Now, 10 years back, the carbon finance model came. Some came with the thought that, okay, we can give you, we take the rights. With money in the pocket, they come and say that the land also belongs to us. We said that, no, we cannot work in this model. So the model that we worked is the land remains with the government, with the common property. They invest on the trees, the planting of the trees, the financial inclusion, that the communities are benefited. Then when it is growing, like now after 10 years, there are birds coming, there are huge heronry colonies, there are crab collectors, 50 were there in 2010, now there are 550, because it's all the ecosystem services the mangroves give to the shrimp. And this honey, which is all going to the communities, this carbon financer, they are taking the VERs. And that too, we bargained that, okay, suppose you are having 100 rupees invested, so you are getting 100 rupees back through VERs. Then you are not generating profit out of it. Okay, you have done an investment. They said that, okay, you see, we are making an investment. Okay, fine, you are getting it back through VERs, but it is over 10, 15 years, not immediately. It is an upfront investment they are making. If the forest stands, if the communities really work for it, and after 5, 6, 7, like this is the 12th year, now it's generating carbon things, the carbon VERs. So this is an upfront investment they are making. So we bargained with them that, okay, you are investing 100 rupees, you are getting back through VERs 100 rupees, but the forest is maybe generating much more than you have invested. So what to do with that? So then again we went into an agreement with the communities. The communities are getting benefited, that it will be, the excess will be again shared between the communities and the finances to the extent of 50%. So this is a bargaining process, that what carbon finance model really fits into that area and which the communities are comfortable with. It's not that we intend to do, for us it was like we intended a large scale restoration project. Being a conservation practitioner, we have got that. Communities wanted mangroves to grow. They have the mangroves now. They are getting fish, shrimp, crab, ecotourism. When the waves are coming, it is protecting as the natural bioshield. So they are happy. And the investors who are investing upfront, they are also getting their returns back, just the investments back. And if they are getting more than that, then they are sharing it with the community. So that is the understanding. So I think that it is a win-win situation for all. Like us, it's for bioshield, We are going for landscape restorations, they are getting their investments back, the communities are getting, anyway the plants are there, the land is with the communities, only the carbon thing inside, there is some here and there going. So we are not bothered with that. So long it doesn't, I would say, exploit the communities of their rights. So you can bargain and make it fit into the model that you want to work upon.
Would you want to take the white-winged wood duck conservation?
I can start, but you can complement it later. So the question is theoretically about keystone species. So why we have tiger, why don't we have some other species? That's the question. Okay, so the answer to the question is based on our approach. If we are following a landscape approach, which is the core philosophy of tiger conservation, definitely we are following the energy pyramid, which is operating in that landscape. So energy pyramid begins with the grasses, then the grazers, then the predators, right? So if we have sufficient number of predators, in our case we have chosen as tiger, which is in the apex of the predator. Their number, their abundance, their fecundity, I mean to say the reproduction rate, will explain in great details and great manner the ecological resilience that landscape have. Because in simple terms, if you have grass, there will be deers. If there are deers, there will be tigers. If there are enough, they will reproduce. If they aren't, they will not reproduce. It's simply like that. So we need an indicator species. Similarly, we can adopt according to, suppose if the conservation area is very small, we may not look for a very like an apex occupier of a food chain. We can go for intermediate. It depends on that concept. That's why we don't have elephant. As a elephant, okay, we have elephant project, but elephant is not considered as a symbol of that level of keystone. So that is the main reason why it is. But of course, if you compare the rhino, it's not in the apex, but we are talking exclusively with respect to a landscape. But in that landscape also, tigers are there. Even in Kaziranga, tigers are there. So it is our philosophy, of course, embedded on ecological performance. For that, we are using a keystone. Of course, we can use other keystones also if they are sufficiently reflecting the ecological performance of energy flow in that system. Now, please.
Thank you. The only thing that I would add is, you see, what is the basic principle on which these approaches are done? As Mr. Rajesh pointed out, the apex means you're looking at the food chain and the energy flow, and you look at where or what do you conserve, which would ensure everything below that, the food web which is there, is also conserved. Because if you don't, if you focus on this elite species, then the chances are you have to also bring about the conservation of the others below that, the others which are linked in the food web, right? This is the scientific or the ecological rationale behind that. But I also think that there's another angle, and which is the media, right? For the media, what are the things that they're promoting? You see, these are elite species, these are keystone species, so there's immediately a connection, or you connect when you talk about tiger conservation. If you're going to talk about white-winged wood duck, how many people know about that, right? So even for the media, they will look at what is going to bring about readership on a larger scale. It's not that they're not reporting on that. There are, if you look at white-winged wood duck and what has been written in Assam, you have quite a lot of stories which are written on that in the media as well, right? But as I said, it's also how important in the ecological framework and the food chain is that particular species, right? Repeat the question that you had on Sweden. Yes, the carbon footprint. The answer is yes, it does, right? But it also offsets. As I was explaining, the carbon footprint that you'd have is during the clearing and during the burning, right? Now, one has to also look at carbon footprints from other systems, the alternatives. Mind you, when you talk about other alternatives, the settled agriculture which is there, settled agriculture brings about a permanent change in land use and land cover, right? So you are actually taking away the ability of carbon sequestration because you have removed the forest. In shifting cultivation, you allow the forest to come back, right? That's the way that they balance the carbon footprint. While there is a negativity in terms of the first phase, the clearing phase, but then the fallows make up for that. Do we have any other questions or any other intervention? Yes, please. Fine. So you first, and then we go to you.
Hello. My name is Atonia Nato, and I don't have any particular affiliation. I just came here out of curiosity and on behalf of future generations. So my question was actually targeted towards the Arunachal government, and if there is any representative available, so I would like to question. Okay, so Mr. Rajesh, sir, I have a question. So you mentioned about carbon credit in the PAKE declaration. Sir, the value of carbon credit in 2019 was around 320 rupees, and in 2020 it rose around up to 420 rupees. So I would like to know how much are the carbon credits worth that you have mentioned, and what have you what are the steps you are going to take to make the public aware about it, because for them it's absolutely an alien topic and they find no relevance in this issue, in this topic. So and not only that, they don't find not only relevance, but they don't find any profit value in this knowledge.
Thank you for those questions. First of all, about the carbon market. So as of the date, the certified emission reductions, CERs, that is a currency used in the carbon market. That is a reflection of the carbon stored or sequestered in a particular project or mitigated otherwise. So that ranges from 3 USD to safely 18 to 20 USD, and in extreme cases to 50 USD also, but they are very like outliers. Now, coming to nature-based credits, which you talked about, forestry, agriculture, so they can easily fetch anything above 5 at this moment. And if you conceive projects that are embedded on sustainable development and other social goals, then the value of these years will fetch much more in the carbon market. So it can go even up to 12 USDs per year. So that is the market reflection. Now coming to project formulation, we already have the policy in position. So that is the basic document which any government departments needs to start with. So the starting work is done. Now there are directions already in the government issued to different departments to identify projects across sectors like agriculture, horticulture, forestry, and so on, to prepare projects to enter into this market. So we are in that stage at this moment, project identification, and then further steps related to formulation. It involves a lot of steps actually to reach and get to the real crediting stage. So now the point on community, definitely that angle is already considered. We are trying to anchor our projects as much as possible with the community in participation, so that the benefit will flow to the community. So the things are at this stage at this moment. Of course, it has to take forward, and for that process has already won. Yeah, thank you.
Pleasant evening all. I'm Vikram Singh from Center for Art Science and Himalayan Studies, Department of Science and Technology, Government of Arunachal Pradesh. Uh, First of all, I would like to thank you, Drupad sir, for clearing and busting the myth regarding this shifting cultivation. Because earlier, we as a common citizen, what we think as shifting cultivation, it is one of the major contributor for this soil erosion and obviously climate change. So I think, sir, on this through this presentation, he has cleared and busted the myth. So I have a similar kind of question. It's just a common question even the common citizens might they have in their minds, just like in shifting cultivation, burning the forest is one of the process. So I would like to have the opinion of Drupad sir. So what's your opinion on this forest fire? Because the recent forest fire in Greece, whether it's in California, the Amazon forest, because we consider as a citizen or as a normal common citizen, we have been taught as the forest, they are the lungs of the mother nature. So what do you think about? What's your opinion on this forest fire, the large forest fire, and also?
Thank you. You see, why go as far as Australia or California? We have been having forest fires even in places like Uttarakhand, Himachal. These are areas where I remember when I was working in Almora in GB Pant Institute, and Kamal Nath was the environment minister at that time. The ministry had bought at least one, if not more, helicopters to help in managing the forest fires which were there, right? So it's an issue which is here closer to home. It's even in India that we have that. Now, I think there is a difference in terms of the forest fires which used to happen earlier and now. Forest fires happen accidentally, right? And it happens many a times because of the carelessness and the lack of civic sense that we have. Several times in Uttarakhand, in Almora, where I worked for some time, and I know some of them were started because as they're moving in a vehicle, which it traverses pine forests, and at this time of the year you have a lot of pine litter which is down in the field. It's dry, the taxis are going, and someone is smoking and they just throw the butt, right? And it starts the fire. After that it becomes very, very difficult to control. In recent times, the increase in intensity and volume of forest fires is linked with changes which are brought about because of climate change. What has happened? Temperatures have increased, so it's become warmer and it's become drier. You don't have rainfall. If you look at trends in terms of the rainfall, what you'll find is that the winter months, when we used to have a dry season till about mid-March perhaps, today that's extended. You don't have the rains, pre-monsoons and the monsoons, till late May. So the number of months when you have a winter dry period has increased to maybe around 6 months. 6 months of sunshine, no rain, makes the litter in forests very brittle, and they're very fire prone. So they're combustible. Next comes even events like lightning that Partha was talking about, right? A lightning comes in and you have quite a lot of dry, you don't have rain in there, but you would have what are known as like storms, right? Where you have these discharges, and they can cause the forest fires, right? Most of the places, what we have seen is whatever the cause, the extent, intensity, and volume has increased because of this climate change, the changes brought about because of climate change, right? It's a major issue which is coming about, and you will find that these are gradually increasing globally, right? Many of the areas, it has become next to impossible to contain the fire, not manage, but to contain it within an area where it's manageable. So this is a challenge which is coming up, and it's going to increase. The last point that I'd make on this, and in response to what Partha had talked about, the Mizoram fire, right? I think it's wrong to attribute this to shifting cultivation. Simple reason. If you look around any of the shifting cultivation communities, one of the things that they will do before they start the firing is they make fire lines. And Mizoram is famous for that, right? They will ensure that there's a fire line and the fire from shifting cultivation does not spread. Second thing is, you go to any community, they will not have shifting cultivation fields near the village or next to the village. And that's because they know that there could be accidental fires which are caused because there are winds sometime which bring the embers, and if you have the villages which are made, the houses which are made of straw, right, you can have fires there. So they are aware of this. It's not that they are not aware, right? So there's a difference from the earlier example of Uttarakhand where, the fires can start accidentally by someone's neglect to the fires which are happening here, right? I remember some years back, there was a very serious and a very big fire in Zero, where 1 or 2 villages were burned down, right? And today what you find is, if you go in there, you no longer see the bamboo and thatched houses. They're all concrete today, right? So that's, as people adapt, as they evolve, they realize that there are certain changes which need to be brought about. Are there any more questions? Otherwise, we will... Oh, yeah, we have. Please.
I'm Bhaswati Borgohai. Listening to you, sir, that the way you broke the myth about shifting cultivation, I felt like doing a Thanos kind of trick and, convert the world population into shifting cultivators and make the entire world green. I was wondering how old is this information? How, since when, how long has experts known about it? And I was wondering how come this has not become a common knowledge yet? And how come the discourse is still, stuck on a wrong footing? And in Arunachal also, as recently as I think last month, right? There was this conference on promoting palm oil cultivation. And, when we have this kind of expert knowledge, which are established knowledge, and yet how come our region is sold this kind of wrong information to our ministers and to our common public? Would you like to reflect on it?
Thank you for that question. You see, when you look at publications, when you look at the knowledge on shifting cultivation, as I pointed out when my opening remarks, the negative narrative started during the colonial times, right? And it continues. Now, the reason, as I said, was the rent-seeking, objective of the colonial powers, and therefore they promoted this. Went along, and it's been reinforced on and on and on. I also mentioned 1957 about FAO's stand on this, and they called it the most destructive land use in tropical, areas. Today, and this I'm talking about October 2021, when the UN Food System Summit was held. Just before that, FAO came up with a publication, right? What they did was, they were looking at what are nature positive systems, indigenous food systems, and what can one learn from them? Are there any practices which are game changers? They studied 8 systems across the world, right? And this spans, we had one study in Meghalaya as well. This spans, Asia, Africa, Latin America, the whole world. What surprises us is, out of this 8, 5 are shifting cultivation systems. So today FAO has come full circle and have changed their perception. Today they're saying that these are systems which are game changers. If we want nature positive farming systems which are sustainable, which contribute to climate action, and which ensures that there is global food and nutritional security, we need to promote this, right? Now, it's taken us a long time. I myself have been engaged in policy engagement since, when Partha was mentioning, right, the easy mode thing. So when I was still here, in fact, it's a little bit going into my personal history, right? But I think I will give you that, it's necessary. You remember the famous Godivarman, I think, case, the Supreme Court ruling against Godavarman case, right? So when states protested to the Supreme Court, they set up a committee which was to look into the estimated present value of forests, right? So, and this was linked to Kampa, this was linked to compensatory afforestation. That what is the valuation that you take, what is the methodology whereby any deforestation which takes place, they have to pay a compensation. Interestingly, shifting cultivation remain on that list because you are, supposedly you're causing deforestation. So if a shifting cultivation is, clearing a forest patch, they have to pay compensation. As, for afforestation again. The Supreme Court appointed committee went around the country. There was a hearing which was held in Guwahati. And it was a committee which was chaired by Kanchan Chopra. Professor Kanchan Chopra was from the Institute of Economic Growth in Delhi. They invited me. I was in Itanagar at that time. I went and made a presentation on shifting cultivation. What happened was, they presented that to the Supreme Court, and the court gave a ruling which exempted shifting cultivators from paying compensation, because the expert committee said shifting cultivation is a unique and a special form of agroforestry. It's not forestry. So that's the way that it brought in. So there were changes, policy changes which came about. The last few years, 2017 onwards, we had been engaged in easy mode with Niti Aayog, again to look into shifting cultivation and its management, right? I was one of the authors of the report on shifting cultivation, and the recommendations have been taken up very seriously, right? So there were issues. Now, I'm not sure whether you all are aware that legally, if you look at the Forest Conservation Act, shifting cultivation is illegal. So anyone who is doing shifting cultivation is actually liable to penal action under the Forest Conservation Act, right? And no one talks about that because, as you know, shifting cultivation is something which the governments of Northeast India will not say that you do away with this, or they try to, because there are a lot of issues which are involved in this. So again, the Niti Aayog asked me as the expert to make a note and say what is my opinion and how can we go about this in this way. Although it hasn't been resolved, the pandemic actually brought that whole, you know, the speed of everything down. But I pointed out that, you know, from a legal perspective, we have to look at two things. One, under the sixth schedule, you are allowed, or the tribal areas, sixth schedule areas, you are allowed to continue with your traditional practices. That's a constitutional right. Shifting cultivation is a traditional practice. So when the FCA, the Forest Conservation Act, says, no, you can't do it, it's illegal, deforestation is illegal, which takes precedence? The constitutional right or the Forest Rights Act? The Forest Conservation Act, right? So that's one issue which is still there, which has to be looked at legally. But what I'm trying to say is that slowly there is a growing recognition that the earlier perception of shifting cultivation, perhaps we were wrong. And the reason is that there are a number of, you know, the second generation issues that I talk about, right? These are things which are being recognized by the government. That yes, we have done things, we haven't taken care of certain of these things. Academically, there is a lot of publications. Again, I've been involved in that, and we have, there's a very well-known colleague and a friend of mine who is the editor of 4 volumes, with another one which is coming out, it will be 5 volumes, which are on shifting cultivation, right? Each of these volumes around this thick, because they have at least around 1,000 to 1,500, you know, articles in there, which are looking at how communities have innovated, what are the things, how have change taken place, right? Now, there are things like, to give you one example, the forest, the rubber gardens, right? Rubber gardens or rubber forests of Indonesia, right? These are in shifting cultivation areas. So there's a lot of publication which is coming out, which is, you know, giving the contrary view from what was held. There is a group which consists of a consortium of researchers from Europe, from USA, and also from Australia, right? And they've been working, a lot of work has gone on in Southeast Asia, Vietnam, Cambodia, Laos to a certain extent, and they have debunked a lot of the myths which are there. Now, the publication that I handed over to the Deputy Chief Minister, it's online, but if you go through that, you'll find a lot of these publications which are there. One of the publications talks about soil erosion. Another one talks about carbon sequestration, right? There are other groups which are talking about hydrology and how changing from shifting cultivation fallows into plantations, how it has affected hydrology in the Mekong basin, right? There are a number of things which are happening, and they'll, you know, link it up to that. So in conclusion, I would say that there is a lot of publications which are coming out. There is awareness which is there. Getting policies into practice is something which will take a little bit of time, because these are things which don't happen overnight, right? It will take a long time. I hope I can see those changes in my lifetime.
Can I add to that?
Yeah, sure. I think you can use this, Martha.
I mean, again, I found again it's quite thought-provoking. See, I will sum up very bluntly, saying that, number one, when a wrong perception pervades the policy circle for years, and in case of shifting cultivation, it had its roots in colonial days. So it's been years, 100 years, more than 100 years. And it has been going on in that circle, and there was no intention either on the part of colonial, pre-colonial, post-colonial, or independent governments to give science its chance, right? So when such wrong perceptions and kind of wrong mindset continues for a long time, the system develops an inertia against change. Against change. So this is one reason, and to you know, to bring in change, you really, on the other side, you really need a lot of hard work and consistent effort to bring change. Who will do that? Because on the underside, who are the sufferers? The traditional communities. Their voice is suppressed always. They don't have a voice of a scientist or a policy maker to be at par in this, battle of who is better, whose, perception is the right one. So I think, that the researchers are also partly responsible. Not much research was done. Why? Because the way we do our research, we develop our research agenda, till recently was actually not policy driven, or we were seldom interested in socially relevant research. We have been doing research on all and sundry, thousands and thousands of topics. How many of them actually deal with practical problems of farmers? So, doing something credible on a problem which is of life and death to these people, how much of research has come up? Mekong and all that, fine. Some people are dedicatedly doing it. How about in Northeast India, after P.A. Ramakrishnan and all that, how many people? Myself, I did something else. I didn't do that, right? So I think negligence of researchers to some extent, and it is not enough to do a research. The researcher also undertake the responsibility of bringing it to the policymakers. And usually, it is now a very, kind of have become a fashion and a practice to leave this thing to somebody else. Oh, we can do only research. We are not good at writing at policy perspective or policy paper, so somebody will do it. As a result, the person who has done a beautiful piece of research, he has developed all the understanding. That understanding is not communicated to the policymaker, because whoever has written that policy note, he is not able to carry this whole lot of knowledge from the researcher to the policymaker. So I think researcher has a larger responsibility. I'm a good researcher. I may not be able to write the language that policy maker understands, right? But then definitely I can be a part of a whole team, right? So that I can put the technical argument there, that this is why we have said so. So I would say, including myself, researchers have a larger responsibility. Say they didn't probably, they didn't go beyond, they didn't feel responsible beyond producing a certain thesis, certain paper, right? And probably they didn't feel responsible enough to go a step further to serve the cause of the Jumias, or any marginalized community, or any people who are suffering from so-called policy injustice. Thirdly, this is quite proverbial. The disconnect between science and policy, at least in India, the disconnect between research and policy is proverbial. We all know that. And again, I think both sides are responsible. Policymakers on their own sides, they are very, very intolerant to science. In many cases, actually, they don't even want to listen to the people who do research. And scientists and researchers and scientists are not willing to go that extra mile. And that's not my headache, I have to produce a PhD, I have to produce it. So that kind of disconnect is also there. But things have changed, slowly changing. Now there are people who are actually holding this feeling, this extra sense of responsibility, that my duty or responsibility doesn't end there. I should take one additional step, and I should help this entire thing to go to the policymakers, so that the knowledge I have generated is useful to these people, right? So those are also reasons why it took so much of time in busting myths or in correcting perceptions, in all that, right? Just end up after, before ending, I give you another very important example of misperception that has been there in the mind of policymakers in Northeast and all over India, but especially in all those flood affected areas, right? Another colonial perception that have been pervading policymakers' mind, say in states like all over India from colonial days is that floods are the worst thing that happened to us, that destroys development. Floods are very bad. Therefore, all rivers should be controlled so that there's no flood. That is the policy. And nothing can be, nothing can be, uh, different from the truth. Nothing can be farthest from the truth. It's actually the otherwise. But slowly now, even in the policymakers' circle, truth is dawning. They have, slowly they are realizing that, okay, yes, we actually for a while we forgot about the merits of flooding, about the ecological services of flooding, about the benefits of flooding. We only concentrated on structural intervention, and we wanted to control a river by, imposing one pair of embankment on a river so that all our roads come to it. It has never happened nowhere in the world. Since for last 150 years, this approach to structure-dominated flood management has not worked, and actually the total area of flood-affected area has increased over last 150 years. And in states like Bihar, this is still a very important, very one of the most controversial issues, not much developed in Assam and all that, but in Bihar, people have been fighting against this kind of policies for 150 years, right? So this is another perception that is still there, but slowly breaking down. Because the same reason, new research has come, new knowledge has come, policymakers have become more sensitive. They have started reading research papers, right? So they have started paying attention to what scientists are changing, and whole thing is slowly, improving. And therefore, you can see its reflection in the most recent kind of disaster management plans and policies and all that. Slowly they have started talking about bioengineering, nature-based solutions, right? And so many other things. And they have in a way acknowledged that embankments or engineering structure or concrete structure is not the only solution to flood. There are many other things that you can do that. These are actually counterproductive in many situations. We have actually worsened our flood situation by unwisely constructing so many structures. We have put on a lot of embankments where we should not have done it unnecessarily. And very badly designed, very badly implemented projects. So in many cases, it was also a result of nexus, various directions. But on a certain ground, we can also see in when we look back, we see that it was again because of a certain kind of ignorance on part of both the parties and the disconnect, the so-called disconnect between people, the traditional knowledge of people, the researchers who are bringing in science as well as traditional knowledge, but not doing anything to reach the policymaker. So with this second example, I also wanted to communicate to you all that there are other myths also. I'm not going into that, but slowly things are improving in the policy cycle. Thank you.
Thank you, Partha. I think you have a question, please. Yeah.
I'm going to keep it really short and precise. There was this question. My name is Nyato Moseng, and I work for the local media called The Space, and I'm a sports journalist actually. And I would be lying if I tell you that I didn't enjoy this session and everything, but I really enjoyed it. All right. So I'm going to keep it real short and precise. I just wanted to ask you that we had this snowfall, unprecedented snowfall, a couple of weeks back. And as a sports journalist, I know it's not my area of expertise, but I really wanted to know that what would be the reason? Is it another, warm summer in the future, or is it a risk factor, or is it, a threat for us? Because the greatest example would be the Darya Hills right there. If you go outside, it witnessed snow cap all over the mountain in 38 years for the first time. So this is the question I really wanted to ask. Right there, my colleague Emma we've been talking to each other. You know, the rest of the state was celebrating severe snowfall, right? But we had this doubt. So finally, since it's all about climate change, I think I'll find the answers today.
Um, as the moderator, I would take the indulgence and answer that, right? You see, what is happening is you are seeing a lot of extreme events and change in the patterns, right? Now, if you recall, the winter for at least the last 5 years has been less severe. It's been warmer. But if you, think back on the last few years, it's around end January, right, after the 15th, and maybe first week of February, when suddenly you find a cold wave, right? Now that's something, if you go back to meteorological information, I think that would bear out what I'm saying. Personally, I feel that there's a shift in terms of the seasons. I earlier talked about the longer winter dry spell, later monsoons. We start the monsoons now in around June in the northeast, whereas I remember as a child, we used to have monsoons starting from April end. So that's the change which has come about. At least about 2 to 3 weeks of shift. Similarly, in the winter, December is no longer the coldest month. January is no longer the coldest month. It's end January, early February when the cold. I know in Shillong it's been, you have had unprecedented hailstorm. Why is this happening? As Ritu was talking about changes in the polar areas, affect the orography, that means, the rainfall patterns and the wind changes. This year, in February, the reason that we had cold winters and cold days and the rainfall was because of our western depression, right? That's a change. It's happened in the last 2 or 3 years. It wasn't as severe. This year is very severe. That's why you have had rainfall in these areas. But then, this is a speculation that I'm making. We have to look at the data to say that this is a trend. But definitely we can say this, that yes, the weather variability has increased. I think we'll stop with that and call for the organizers for the closing remarks.
Last question from me. Was it anything to do with the pandemic lockdown? The factories stopped working. There was no laborers, no vehicles movement. Very minimized, world over. So was it anything to do with that, the cold ones? Maybe because smoke emission or carbon emission from Earth has lessened.
I don't have an answer to that because it could be, it's a speculation again.
Speculation.
Yeah. But what I would say is, if you remember the first few months when the lockdown started, right? You could see the mountains from the plains. The air had cleaned up. And that was because pollution levels had gone down, right? So there were a lot of clear air. And we saw this in, India as well as in Nepal. Usually the last few years, you can't see the Himalayas because of the smog. But during the lockdown, right, it decreased. You could see the Himalayas, right? So probably there is a connection, but we don't know.
That is not conclusive.
Since we've been talking about, the unprecedented phenomena that has been happening, the snowfall, right? So when we were researching on it, it was so hard to find an expert, right? Not just this, including the Dambuk orange that suddenly declined this year. The production was very less, so it was quite hard to find expertise in it, right? So do you think that an indigenous researchers, how important it is to have an indigenous researchers in a society like Arunachal?
Okay. The first part of your question, when you're talking about the oranges, you have the expert next to you. Professor Singh is a horticulturist, so he would be able to tell you probably the reasons why. on the question of involving local and indigenous researchers, who pointed out, I think it was Ritu again, that UNFCCC recognized this quite early on. I mean, I have been interacting with the UNFCCC. I was on their advisory group for the LEG, then on NWP and so on. Over the years, what I've seen is a growing recognition in the West that indigenous communities in the South actually have a lot of solutions to the present problems. And these solutions are found on what Ajanta was talking about, what I was talking about, the empirical experience, the local knowledge, right? Therefore, to involve the local people is very important.
Okay. So, shall we wind up? Or do you have anything to express? Vinay Singh ji.
One line.
Yeah,
That
really interesting to get
yeah,
your insight.
I see that orange whole Northeast India, like Tripura or Arunachal or Meghalaya, they are having the dieback problem. Several from this NRC, National Research Center from Nagpur, lot of scientists they came to search that about that, but still they are not able to find out that what is the region of dieback of the orange, whole Northeast India, not only this Arunachal, whole Northeast India. So still they are trying to find it out that good root stock, and there they can do that budding they can do. That is the main problem. And another thing that poor management is the big problem in whole Northeast India. Management is a very poor of oranges. Only when flowering, fruiting comes, then farmer they visit. Rest time they just leave that. That is the region. So several regions have dieback of that orange whole Northeast India.
Please say.
Is that climate? Where I remember when we worked in 2000 in Namthing, the valley was totally orange. It was called Orange Valley. But now, last 10 years, there is nothing because the orange grow has shifted upwards, up the hills. Up the hills because it's very warm there. Now it has become warmer in the valley. So when it is shifted upwards, the soil, the conditions are not congenial for the orange growing. But still, since it is growing there, first harvest is good, but then some locust is coming when the seed is growing, and that locust, still many people are working, the ICAR institutes are working, and we are also working with them, that locust, maybe it is in that altitude that it is growing and not allowing the seed to germinate proper, so that like sir said, that the right planting material is available and that can be grown. So, and why this locust is growing, it is not prevalent in the lower areas. It is in that altitude that it comes and affects. So these are very many issues that are happening, and changing climate is of course one of the reasons behind it.
Over to you.
Okay. Our glorious 50 years of Arunachal Pradesh. It was late Indira Gandhi, the then Prime Minister of India, who coined Arunachal Pradesh, replacing Northeast Frontier Tract. Not tract. It was agency then, Northeast Frontier Agency. She renamed NEFA into Arunachal Pradesh in Zero in 1970, January 20 of 1972. So it's 50 years now since then. And it was wonderful having a one-day seminar on climate change and sustainable development, the Arunachal Pradesh perspective. So it was quite a valuable information that the experts, our resource persons have shared. And it was quite enriching to the Arunachali community. Probably will be more cautious in future to deal with the climate change. It's most talked about subject in the world. people of Arunachal Pradesh will definitely benefit out of your expression, your deliverance. And I, on behalf of people of Arunachal Pradesh, entire people of Arunachal Pradesh, would like to thank our panelist, Drupad Chaudhary sir, Partho Jyoti Das sir, Ajanta De, our own Mr. Rajesh Kumar, Vinay Singh sir, Professor Vinay Singh, of course, to ladies sitting out there, Miss Emma, and to Mr. Rituras Pukon, Baswati, the government of Arunachal Pradesh, especially to the Chief Minister of Arunachal Pradesh, young Chief Minister of Arunachal Pradesh, who is leading young government in Arunachal Pradesh. Very innovative, very energetic, and very futuristic, Chief Minister we have. And we have, along with him, a very good team of ministers and MLAs who are following his advice and working as a team Arunachal. This seminar will definitely beneficial to each one of us, each Arunachali. And with this, we will wind up this session, and the next session will be a cultural program to do away with our stress. So I would like to request our resource persons and the guests to stay over, or otherwise, if you want to leave for some time, you can leave and you can come back. Let's have our food here, if it is possible for you. It will be probably the artists. They have already arrived in this hall. Yeah, we can be back by 7 then. Nah? Okay, thank you very much, everybody. Yeah.